Hi, this is Sir Jet and welcome to another episode of the Rizal Lectures. Today I am here at the Rizal Shrine in Calamba City. And right outside the house of Rizal is a Bahay Kubo. This is where the little boy Rizal made the statue of Napoleon. And right over there, a little over there, is the statue of the little boy Rizal with his pet dog. History books tell us that the dog has a name. His name was Usman. He's male and his color black. Historians also tell us that every afternoon, Rizal would walk with Usman to the lakeshore of Laguna de Bay. And along the way, he would lecture to his dog about social issues. Isn't that interesting? Join me today in this episode and learn more interesting things about Rizal the Wonder Child.
This lecture is a collection of some notable anecdotes on Rizal's childhood, as told by his mother and his sisters during the American period. You know, after Rizal died in 1896, the Americans took over our country. And during the American colonial period, Rizal's relatives were very much alive. They were the subject of many interviews by journalists and biographers. So many stories about Rizal circulated during this time. The last Rizal relative lived up to 1951. That's his sister Trinidad. So you can just imagine from 1900 to 1951, there were many stories that you can hear about Rizal straight from the horse's mouth. So let's begin. The first one is about Rizal's physical appearance. Rizal's childhood nickname was Pepe. In the Spanish language, all people with the name Jose had the nickname Pepe. And his sisters would make fun of little Pepe because he was short for his age and his body and head were not proportional. His head was bigger compared to the normal heads of children his age. Some people would argue that maybe he had a larger brain compared to others. He's not a genius for nothing. Speaking of geniuses, do you know that Rizal learned how to read and write before the age of 5? During that time, very few Filipinos could read and write, and how much more for a 5-year-old. Most kids in the last century would learn how to read and write when they reach grade 1, maybe age 6 or 7. So Rizal was quite different during his time. His mother was his first teacher. She would very patiently teach Rizal the alphabet and how to speak in Latin and Spanish. At night, she would tell stories to little Pepe, and it was said that his favorite story was the story of the moth or the gamu-gamu. The gamu-gamu was so curious about the light or the flame on the candle or the gasera, and so it flew very near the flame until it caught its wings and the gamu-gamu burned and died. This story was told by his mother as a warning for Rizal to be very careful because they were living in a society with many dangers. Incidentally, this happened to Pepe in his adulthood. He flew very near the flame or the Spanish authorities. He fought them too much and it cost him his life. There was also the story about Rizal and his dog. Pepe had a male black dog named Usman, and he would walk his dog every afternoon from their house up to the lakeshore or a playa in Calamba. And once they're at the lakeshore, Rizal would talk to his dog about social issues, about the abuses of the Spaniards on his countrymates. Wow, that dog must be really smart. He had Rizal for a social studies teacher. And then there's this story about Rizal showing his poetry prowess even when he was a little boy. It was said that Rizal would write poems and he would recite them or brag about them to his sisters. Then their priest uncle, Father Leoncio Lopez, would drop by their house because Father Leoncio just lives next door. Rizal's house is just beside the big Catholic church in the Calamba Plaza. Their uncle priest would tease Pepe that he doesn't believe that Pepe wrote those poems. And that would make Pepe very irritated, and he would raise his voice and argue with his uncle priest that it was really him who wrote those poems. When Rizal was old enough to go to school, his mother sent him to Binan to study under the famous teacher Justiniano Aquino Cruz. During the Spanish era, there were no elementary schools yet similar to our elementary schools. The equivalent of elementary education in their time was the children would live in the house of the teacher. The Spanish word for teacher is maestro. And in the house, they would help around with the chores, and during daytime, the teacher would teach them various subjects like science, literature, and mathematics. It was said that Pepe excelled over his other classmates who were bigger and taller than him, and he became a better writer and speaker in the Spanish language. One day, there was a classmate who was jealous of Rizal, and he bullied him. But Rizal, even though he was small, was able to defeat that bully in a fist fight because Rizal had some martial arts training provided by his uncle. The bully's name was Pedro, who happens to be the son of the teacher. There was also this myth about a controversial poem that Rizal supposedly wrote, and this controversial poem had the very famous line, "Ang hindi magmahal sa sariling wika ay mabaho pa sa malansang tilapia." Ay, no. Ang hindi magmahal sa sariling wika ay mabaho pa sa malansang isda. Have you heard of that line? Everybody thought that that poem or that line was originally from Jose Rizal. But actually, it's not. This line came from the poem Sa Aking Mga Kabata, which was allegedly written by Rizal when he was 8 years old. But actually, the Rizal sisters couldn't and wouldn't confirm this. They said that they never remember Pepe writing such a poem. But how did this poem actually circulate and was being taught in schools up to today? Actually, Sa Aking Mga Kabata first came out in 1906, which was 1 decade after Rizal's death in 1896. This poem was published in a magazine during the American colonial period. In those years, many other poems and writings came out with the Jose Rizal byline. It was a popular practice during that time that writers would gladly attribute their works to Rizal. Rizal was such a big hero during that time, and if I wrote a poem, instead of writing my name, I would write written by Jose Rizal. So, most probably, this poem, Sa Aking Mga Kabata, was one example of that. One clue that Rizal didn't write it is that Sa Aking Mga Kabata was written in Tagalog. All the other Rizal poems, novels, and essays were written in Spanish. Another clue that Rizal didn't write Sa Aking Mga Kabata is the word kalayaan in the poem. Remember, the legend says that Rizal wrote this when he was 8 years old, when the Philippines was not yet free. So how could a little boy talk about kalayaan when he has no idea what it is all about? Where did he get that idea about kalayaan at the very tender age of 8? When the Philippines was very much deep into Spanish colonial rule. Another clue is that the spelling of kalayaan uses the letter K. In Rizal's time, the letter K was not used. Instead, they used the letter C. So kalayaan would be spelled with a C. And all the other words like ako, ikaw, would be spelled with a C, not a K, because there's no K in the Spanish alphabet. We just started using the K during the time of Andres Bonifacio when he started the Katipunan, and it was spelled with a K. and also during the American colonial period when the Tagalog language had a resurgence in popularity and the letter K was used instead of the C. So this poem most probably wasn't composed when Rizal was 8 years old, when the letter C was the one being used to spell out the K sounds. And then the biggest clue that this poem isn't really from Rizal is that his sisters wouldn't agree that it was Little Pepe who wrote this. All of them couldn't remember Pepe writing such a poem. But nonetheless, the fact that sa aking mga kabata was so popular, and the legend says that Rizal wrote it when he was 8 years old, is just a testament of how big Jose Rizal was during the American colonial period. People believed that the little boy Rizal had in him a big potential. He can be a very great man. He was so great already at a young age. How much more when he would grow up to be an adult? So people really looked up to Jose Rizal as the greatest of all Philippine national heroes. The last story is about how Rizal prophesied about himself. When Pepe was a little boy, he would hang out by himself in the bahay kubo in their yard. His Kuya Pasiano is around 10 years older than him, so he doesn't have a playmate. And so Pepe would just play alone inside the bahay kubo. And one day, their sisters found him molding a clay statue of a man. And they asked him, "Who is that man?" And Rizal said, "Napoleon." And his sisters laughed at him for idolizing Napoleon, who was a short man. They must have said, the reason why you are short because your idol is short. And that made Pepe very angry. He snapped back at his sister saying, "Remember this, one day you will be surprised that people will be making statues of me." And true enough, people did make statues of Rizal everywhere. His sisters were guests of honor in the inauguration of Rizal's statue in Luneta in 1913. The American colonial government sponsored the erection of this statue. And when it was finished, there was an unveiling ceremony, and the living members of the Rizal family were there as guests of honor. And just imagine, you're one of Rizal's sisters. You remember the day when little Pepe told you, "Remember this, ate. One day, people will make statues of me." And you're right there in Luneta in 1913, and you're seeing with your very own eyes that Rizal's prophecy is being fulfilled right there in front of you. And it didn't stop there, because in the years to come, many more Rizal statues were erected all over the Philippines, in public schools, in government buildings, in the plaza of every town. And in these occasions, the sisters of Rizal were invited for the unveiling ceremonies. So they were fully booked. The living sisters of Rizal had appointments here and there all over the country for the unveiling ceremonies. And in these ceremonies, they would tell how Rizal prophesied about this moment. These are some of the notable anecdotes about Rizal's childhood.
So there, we are now done with this episode. I hope you learned many things. Keep on watching the Rizal lectures. This is Sir Jet saying goodbye and thank you.